So how do people get attacked? If it's not through vulnerabilities, well, obviously social engineering is one. It's more common on non-Linux platforms where people say, you must download this update and attach it in an email, and it's some sort of phishing mail. That's number one. Number two is through web browsers. Certainly the most common, no matter what the platform, is you visit a malicious site or a site that is containing malicious content in some way, and that can run arbitrary code on your system. So that's the biggest one. The other things we've seen in recent years, SSH brute forcing. If you've got your SSH port open to the internet and things can connect to it, you're going to see worms come by and try random combinations. So they're going to try silly passwords like root and root. So if you've got a password of root and a username of root, now's the time to change it. What's the other things we found that are being exploited? Privilege escalation. This is where you've got some user on your system who doesn't have root access, but then through some flaw in the kernel usually can gain root access. Those have tended to be exploited by projects, other Linux distributions who allow their developers who are untrusted access to their machines can get exploited by those. So those are the main ways that people actually really get exploited, because there aren't that many critical vulnerabilities that affect us. I've got some data here for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5. This is for release of 5.0 back in March 2007, right up to 5.1 came out in November 2007, so it's 8 months worth of data. And we actually fixed a lot of security issues. We did over 90 advisories for a full release. I've got a graph there which shows you that for all packages on Enterprise Linux 5, there's about 95 advisories. The red bits, the critical ones, there were 7 criticals that affected it. Of those 7 updates, 4 were in Firefox. So those are issues where you might be browsing a malicious website and it was able to run arbitrary code on your system. We class those as critical. So that's 4 of them. The other 3, one was in Samba. So if you're not sharing files using Samba, you wouldn't have been vulnerable to that. The next one was in Kerberos. Again, if you are not using Kerberos, by default, you wouldn't be using Kerberos. You wouldn't be vulnerable to that issue. And the final one was in PCRE, and PCRE is a regular expression library, and the reason you might have been vulnerable to it is if you were browsing malicious websites within Conqueror. So over half of those are ones where you'd have to kind of take some user interaction to be vulnerable to those issues. Now, for every one of those critical updates, we had updates out to Red Hat Network within a day of those issues being known to the public. Now, to the right of it is the graph for a default installation, because the left-hand side was if you installed Enterprise Linux 5 and installed every single package. It's not very likely, and in fact, there's no easy way to do that. A default installation is on the right side, and that's a more likely scenario. For people running Enterprise Linux 5 now, they've probably got somewhere in between. They've probably installed some of the packages to make up the full distribution. But still, the total maximum number of vulnerabilities that are critical that affected that system in those 8 months was 9. Half of those were in Firefox, so browsing a malicious website. Why is Firefox included in a server distribution? Well, you might want to be able to go to Red Hat Network to do updates. So that's why Firefox is there. But certainly, if you're running Red Hat Linux 5 now, and you're running it on a server and you're not intending to use Firefox, not using Firefox or removing it would remove immediately all those critical issues. Uli Drepper in Red Hat Magazine talked about the various proactive ways that we've been breaking security exploits in recent versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so from my side, I can see how those have actually affected customers. And it's been interesting to monitor them because in Enterprise Linux 5, from the release up to 5.1, we caught 2 issues using those innovative technologies which were completely blocked. So these are issues which would have previously been classified as critical, remotely exploitable vulnerabilities, actually both in Kerberos, in the Kerberos server, and both were mitigated completely by these technologies and were reduced to important. Now, we still had to do a security update because a remote attacker could still crash those services, right? Because of the default of these technologies is to say, let's not make it exploitable, but let's stop the service running. So in both cases, they cause a crash. So it's a remote denial of service, but that's certainly a lot less risk to customers than a remote arbitrary code execution flaw would have been, particularly as Kerberos runs as root. So that's 2 issues that were completely blocked by that technology.